going to introduce you to a variation, and actually there are several variations of this, okay? It's under the heading of SomaVeda Tok Sen, T-O-K-S-E-N, Tok Sen Nuat, okay? Tok Sen Nuat is interpreted several different ways, okay? One is it's using wooden probes to do the pressure, the treatment. Then those wooden probes are either used statically or actually used with a hammer or a mallet, actually would be more accurate. Traditionally, mallets run from quite small, which is a Manaka style, actually a Japanese style or Manaka style hammer, which is used in Manaka style acupressure and acupuncture, okay? And which is a small mallet, has a little, sometimes may have a little leather cover on one end. They're actually quite light because the impact is not supposed to be very heavy. It's just supposed to be the impact. And sometimes the probes, they can be made out of any material, okay? And sometimes can be quite small, sometimes can be this big, and sometimes can have a magnet embedded in the end so that when you thump it, okay, the magnet flexes, but not really flex, it travels with the impact, okay? And as we study biomagnetic theory, okay, we know that, for example, if the magnet vibrates, it's producing an electric field. It's producing a magnetic field. It already has a static magnetic field, but when you vibrate the magnet over the body, it actually produces a very, very minute, now this is not going to shock you, okay, but a very, very minute electrical field. Okay, now traditionally in Thai, you'll be rare to find a Manaka style hammer and probe. You tend to find wooden probes are commonly used in reflexology. Sometimes the same types of wooden probes. Actually, Rob, in that yellow plastic bag, would you grab one of those wooden probes that's there? Okay. All right, so this is the standard probe or tool that's used in Thai reflexology, okay? And both ends can be used, but also the probe itself can be used like this, okay? With lighter pressure, it can also be used like this. It can be used to work the points, okay, either with static pressure or rolling pressure or with a little mallet. Now this is a hardwood like teak, okay, it's a nice hardwood. I'm not going to do too much in the way of hammering with these because these are softwood, okay? And this is more what I like to use for the reflexology because you can get these little points here between the toes. You see how you can get in there with that, so it's made for that. And then you use the bigger end for like the 5 points, the 5 arch points, okay, we have here, or the loam and lines, okay, and so on and so forth, all right? But the smaller point you can use, for example, like the under the ankle points, all right, or between the toes, or on the toes themselves. But I'm not going to start really with this. I'm just showing you that there's different kinds of Tok Sen, okay? And so this is also a variation. There's several different ways to use this. I can use a single stick, or I can use a double stick. In other words, one in each hand, if I want to do that, okay? And you can use it for static pressure. You can use it for rolling pressure. Unilateral static, unilateral rolling, bilateral static, bilateral rolling, okay? And you can also use them 2 at a time on one side unilaterally. And there's a couple different ways that can be done. They can be used dry, which is very common, okay, because your average client is fully clothed. You're not necessarily doing a detox program where you're going to have them sweating and wet, but you can. And you can also use them wet, as in wet with water, or wet, as in wet with a therapeutic oil or some kind of extract. Even, for example, just coconut milk. In fact, just coconut milk right out of the coconut at room temperature is used very frequently in body treatments. Just whack the top off the coconut and put the contents of the coconut in a pitcher or some type of container or bowl, maybe even a couple of coconuts. Sometimes in the more sophisticated settings might take that coconut and actually use a green coconut, so the meat is actually quite soft. You can scoop it out with a spoon, okay? And you scoop out that with the milk into a blender and you blend it up into a blended coconut juice, coconut milk, okay? And then you immediately pour that over your client. Okay, you immediately just pour it over your client, all right? Head to foot, right through the hair, head to foot, okay? And then you use something like this, okay? And you use it for a couple of things. Number one, obviously using a piece of wood like this, if I'm going to press, okay, is a broad, deep, non-specific general compression. It's broad, but it can be as firm as I want it to be, okay? It can be static, and I'm just pressing on the loam and holding, okay? Or I can add a little vibration to it like this, so I'm not really rolling it. I'm just really kind of shaking my hand a little bit to bring that energy into it, right? Or for example, right to the toes. Now, of course, I'm not going to go so hard that I'm going to bruise or injure. And I'm using a loose wrist, so I'm only hitting soft tissue. I'm being very careful that I'm not going to come across and catch the ankle bone or catch the joint of the big toe, you know, that kind of thing. I'm not going to do that. I'm really just on the soft foot, but this is unbelievably stimulating, okay? And because it's broad, it's nice big round, and I'm catching quite a large area, I can actually use a little more pressure. So for example, going up and down the foot here, I could go square to the foot, starting at the heel, and just work through the soft arch, up to the toes. And I might do that 2 or 3 times, okay? Or I might come at an angle. So this was square to the center line on the foot. This is on an angle, right? And I do the same thing. And even though I'm hitting the same area, the effect is different because the angle has changed. Okay? So I'm just giving you this as one illustration. But I'm going to work through, there's actually as much as I could do with these as I could do without these. Right? You guys know I can do a lot with just my hands, right? You've heard. You may have heard. Okay? Well, I can do as much variation with these as I can without these, right? So I'm not going to attempt to show you every position and every application, but I'm going to show you enough that you could take something like this, either 1 or 2 of them, and you could bring this idea of the Tok Sen energy into a session. All right. Now, what are some benefits for the Tok Sen that are unique versus using the empty hand? Okay, what are some of the benefits? All right. One is obviously wood energy. So let's think in terms of an elemental energy, okay? And so bringing the nature into the treatment, that might be something, okay? But go back to that broad, deep, non-specific, general compression idea, all right? And even on static pressure. See, when I put static pressure with a broad but a deep focus here, now it's more specific than the palm of my hand, I want to say that. It's still non-specific in that I'm covering, half a dozen acupuncture points, and actually I'm probably right this second, I'm touching 3 lines on the body, okay? So that's pretty non-specific, right? But the roundness of the pressure not only compresses the tissue, but it stretches it quite deeply, okay? And this stretching of the tissue is a non-specific decompression. So when we think of compressing the body, a lot of times we think what we're doing is, just like when you compress a sponge, right? Just like you compress a sponge. And that's actually true. That's one of the reasons why putting pressure on the body enhances circulation, right? Because if I squeeze this area, whatever fluids and body fluids and venous circulation, arterial circulation, interstitial fluids, and so on are there, move away from that pressure slightly. They move away from that pressure slightly. And that's called a positive pressure. When I release the pressure, that's a negative pressure. And what it does is the body seeks to instantaneously reestablish the equilibrium, okay, or more technically, the homeodynamic status or stasis of the tissue that's just been compressed. It seeks to reestablish itself back to where it was before I mess with it. Just to say it as simply as possible, right? Well, but that's not a perfect process. As the body seeks to reestablish its equilibrium to what it was before I pressed on it, it actually overshoots the mark slightly. And so instead of just restoring the exact amount of circulation and fluid and so on, interstitial fluid and whatnot, that was there before I pressed, it actually puts a little more in there. Well, that's not acceptable. And so it pulls it back a little bit, then it pushes it forward a little bit, then it pulls it back. So there's like a wobble in this reestablishing of the pressure equilibrium, okay? Well, but the bottom line is, after about 10 or 12 seconds, when that wobble, which took place because I put pressure on the body, stops, the area has more oxygen and less toxins than it did before I pressed. The nerves that were affected because of various anatomical principles, the root of the nerve that feeds the surface of the skin at the point where I apply pressure is the same nerve root coming from the same dermal zone, same section of the spine, that feeds the interstitial tissue under that point, that feeds the fascia under that point, that feeds any muscle that's under that point, all the way to the bone at that point. Okay? So that means that the pressure not only has this local circulatory effect, which is actually a result of distortion, the stress of distortion, okay? But in real time, it's having an effect of reducing tension or tone in the nervous system through the whole spinal cord, all the way to the brain. All right? And again, it's a little more specific. Now, the other thing here is when I roll like this, of course, on the inside of the lower leg are always more sensitive points, right? We know that, okay? But that's why I'm on an angle here. When I roll like this, if you could visualize the epithelial, integumentary, epithelial, interstitial, fascial layers and whatnot that are under where I'm rolling here, and you could imagine the roller doing this depression, and as the depression travels, the tissue's being stretched. Okay, it's being distorted. Okay, so what that's going to do, what this is really used a lot for example, is people who have a lot of scar tissue. Okay, so if they have a lot of scar tissue, that this idea of rolling on the body is one of the very best ways to reorganize scar tissue. Now, the process of reorganization might look like I stretch the scar tissue enough that I actually create microscopic lesions, where I actually break some of the adhesions, like burst them as I roll across, because the scar tissue cannot deform to the same degree that the roller is causing it to deform. Okay? But then what happens is, after that, as the body again seeks to restore the equilibrium of the tissue, the stasis of the tissue, okay? It's in a more dynamic environment, and so the little collagen fibers that represent the scar itself, okay, reorganize in a more functional way, because now they're not reorganizing as a result of primary injury, they're reorganizing in a healthier environment. Right? And so they look less random. So if we were to biopsy them and look at them under a microscope, the original scar looks like this. It's all gnarly with little collagen fibers going every which way. And if you look at healthy collagen tissue, also called connective tissue, okay, it's warp and weave. Warp and weave. In other words, it looks like fabric, and it has directional orientation. Okay, which is oriented according to the way that it's supposed to support the structure in motion. Okay, and you lose that when you damage it, when you have scarring. You lose that, because now the different layers of the fabric, of the warp and weft of the fibers, are actually going not just up and down and crosswise, but now they're going at right angles to each other and random angles, and you actually have bits and pieces of the collagen going between the layers. Those are called adhesions, okay? And they cause the layers to stick to each other when they're supposed to be free, okay? So all of this, all right. But let me just move through this a little bit so you can have more of an idea here. And we'll start with puja, just like we always do, right? So I bless my tools. And first I'm just going to start with static pressure, just to let her know pressure's coming. All right. So far so good. Doesn't look too strange, does it? So I can take this pretty much like what I'm accustomed to already. So let's start with what's familiar, and then we'll grow from there. See, it's a lot more powerful, isn't it? A lot more specific. See how I changed my hand position? It's because I don't want to get on the bone too much on the shin here. Okay? And so, of course, what I'm doing right now is dry.
Do they ever heat the wood?
No. You are going to get some sensations that you are not accustomed to from this. It's just the way it's creating, the distortion that it's creating, okay? Now, so I just showed you a little warm-up variation. Let's move to the outside of the leg. And right now I'm just choosing to emphasize more from the southern position. Mostly I'm similar, but my angles are going to have to change to accommodate the tool. I never sacrifice my integrity of my physicality for a tool or for the client. That rule goes for this, it goes for a massage table, it goes for whatever. I never sacrifice my integrity of my center and my spine, okay, over a tool. All right, now so from here, so I'll rotate so I get a little bit on the outside there. And now I'm doing a technique which is press and roll. So I press in, and then I roll, and then I release, and I move it down. Press and roll, press and roll, press and roll, press and roll, press and roll. And then just move it as you need to. Because I'm not really hanging on to it too much, am I? And then on that IT band, come right into the hip. You can't do this with your hands. It feels completely different. You'll get how different it is on the receiving end, right? Let's go all the way down that tight. See how I'm changing the ankle a little bit? So I went from here, and see it, just see that? Okay. For the lower leg, same thing. Make sure I'm off the bone. I don't want direct pressure on. So we know that this point right here in the cleft of the upper tibia where it shoots over in acupuncture stomach 36 is really important energy point, and by energy, a feeling of energy. Fatigue versus vital. Okay, we know that this point has a lot of association as one of the top 20 acupuncture points for regulation of just feeling well. Okay, so I'm going to come in here, and again, see if there's a loam. I'm going to hold it, press and hold, and then I can roll on it. And this tissue is so hard, this tibialis tissue. And so it likes to be stretched. See, get in here. If you got someone with shin splints or issues with this tissue on the outer leg, see how I can get in there and just press and roll is probably one of your bread and butter techniques. Okay? I can also now take it and use it as the club. Okay? Again, being cautious to stay off of any bony surface, right? And so I'm holding this loosely. See this? Open hand, loose. I'm not holding it hard because I want it to be, it's a hammer in this sense, but it's a soft hammer. It's not a hard hammer. The energy's soft, not hard. And it's just a light tapping, and notice the shock wave moving all the way through the leg. Okay, so everything that's moving is being affected. Come on down, always stop, we're going to stop here about the width of the hand.